Morning. Welcome to Bible study. Good to see you guys and gals this morning. We are continuing our series on testimony. After today, there is one more lesson, and then I'll be beginning a new series after that called Understanding Salvation. Going to be looking at some of the essential doctrines of salvation. And I think that'll be very helpful. Anyway, this morning, talking about testimony. The reason we've been doing this series, as I explained in the beginning, is because testimony is the most important part of effectiveness as a believer. We can have events, we can do things, we can put up banners, we can do lots of things, but if as believers we don't have a testimony individually or as a church or as a fellowship, then our effectiveness is always going to be very limited. And so we've talked about a few very practical things so far. This morning we're going to talk about testimony in relationships. Testimony in relationships. So we've got a couple of scriptures to read to begin. First, let's get 1 Peter 1, 22 to 25.
Since you have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit in sincere love of the brethren, love one another fervently with a pure heart, having been born again, not of corruptible seed, but incorruptible, through the word of God, which lives and abides forever. Because all flesh is grass, and all the glory of man as the flowers of the grass. The grass withers, and its flowers falls away, but the word of the Lord endures forever. Now this is the word which by the gospel was preached to you.
And then 1 Peter 2, verses 1 to 3.
Therefore, laying aside all malice, all deceit,
Hypocrisy.
envy, and all evil speaking, as newborn babes, desire the pure milk of the word, what you may grow thereby, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is gracious.
Okay, so testimony in relationships is what we're going to talk about this morning. First, let's talk about the context of relationships. Now, all of life is lived in the context of relationships. The mistaken idea some people have, or the wrong view, is that relationships are coincidental. In other words, they just happen at the same time. We're living life and there happens to be people around, right? You know, there's, the old saying, you can pick your friends, you can pick your nose, but you can't pick your family. Right? But the problem is that we have this idea that relationships, they're just like an add-on to life. They're an additional element, but that is incorrect. Relationships are the context within which you live life. All of life is lived in the context of relationships. Now, of course, there's three major categories of relationship that we need to consider, probably from the closest to the furthest away. First is the family. Genesis 2:24.
Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh.
Okay, this is describing a transition from one set of connections to a new one, but the point is that we are connected. The vast majority of our lives are going to be lived in family connections. Now that changes, of course, as the scripture we just read describes. When we were very young, our primary family connection was our parents, but that changes. We literally leave our parents to start a new family, and then that will change and adapt over time. The point is, these relationships, they're not incidental or coincidental. They are primary. Our lives are lived in the context of a family relationship. And so, family, of course, encompasses these two spectrums. There's that which is not chosen. These are your blood relations. Do you ever meet one of your family members and then you scratch your head and you think, how are we related? Does that happen to you? That happens to me. I meet some people sometimes and I think, I cannot believe that we share DNA, because you embarrass me, right? You can't say that stuff out loud, right? That you just shake your head. When I was younger, we went to a couple family reunions, and I would have been 10, 11, 12, I don't know. And these people I've never seen ever in my entire life except at the family reunion. And they're crazy, right? And so there's that aspect of family, that which is not chosen. But then, of course, there is a portion of your family that is chosen. Marriage is the primary way in which we choose family. But then, of course, adoption and various things. So family, this is the first sphere of relationships. Then we have friends. These are relationships we're not born with, or we don't have a blood connection to. Now, almost exclusively, these are relationships that are chosen. Sometimes it's literally out of desire. I don't know about you, but there's been times I've met people, or we've been around, and I've said, I would like to get to know that person. They seem cool. Right? I don't know what it is. This happens to us. Rachel and I will be at conference, and you just see someone, you talk to them for a moment, you think, we should get to know them. They seem like interesting people. Sometimes it's out of desire. I've shared with you stories before. When I was younger, I had two friends that were very big. That was out of necessity, right? So, because I had a loud mouth, I needed big friends. I didn't choose them for their charming personalities. I chose them because they were big and threatening. So, that happens in all of life. Often this happens in school. Kids form alliances out of necessity. We develop connections, and then, of course, these end up creating long-term relationships sometimes. We have friendships chosen out of difficulty or hardship. At the end of this month, or I guess the beginning of next month, Pastor Louis Lobato Jr. is going to come preach revival for us. He is one of my closest, he and his wife, they are some of our closest friends in all of life. But we had no relationship with them at all until we were in India. We were both missionaries there at the same time. And something about that unique experience there, we went through some very difficult times there, some crazy experiences there. It forged a bond of relationship there. And so, this is the point. Friends are a different kind of relationship. And then the third sphere then is relationships in the world. Now, essentially, when we say the world, we're talking about essentially anyone who's not family or friends. This is a massive group, of course, but really, these are the people that we encounter in day-to-day life that we don't really have a relationship with. These are business relationships, right? People that you encounter at the store. You know, one of the things I love about South Africa and society here is people are very relational. It's not like that in America. Yesterday, I witnessed to a guy, and he said, where are you from? You know, of course, he can tell I'm not from here. I don't know how he can tell, but he can figure it out. He said, I'm from the U.S. He said, I used to work in the U.S. for a short time. And I said, where? And he said, Alabama. I said, I'm so sorry. Because something about Alabama, especially if you are anything other than pure white, is it is not a friendly place to be. And so, but the problem is that's a lot of America. It's just, we're not relational. If you go to the store in the U.S. and you say, how are you doing today? They look at you very suspiciously. Why? Why do you want to know, right? But here, you can just talk to me. How's it going, right? If you're in the drive-thru at McDonald's, how are you? I'm good. Oh, it was a long day today. It's busy. We can talk to people like that here. You can't do that in America. That has nothing to do with my lesson. I'm just sharing with you why we love it so much here. But we have those relationships, right? There's people, I don't even know their name, right? But I know them. I see them every day at the store or wherever you go. That's the world, but these are relationships nonetheless. These aren't close. You're probably not going to invite them to your wedding, but you have relationships there. The mistake some people make is to think that those relationships are less important because they're not close. Some Christians make a huge mistake. They treat the world as irrelevant. You know what? I don't even know them. He's just the baker, right? And so they don't consider their attitudes and how they treat those people. And some Christians actually treat people outside the church as if they are less important. And that is unfortunate because that's not true. So here's just a rough overview. We live in relationships. Of course, this is amplified in Christians. Because many relationships change in the church, our relationships become more vital. 2 Corinthians 6, verse 14.
Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness, and what communion has light with darkness?
Okay, your ability to serve God over time is going to depend on your ability to cultivate good relationships in the church. I've preached on this many times just since I've been here. This is vital. One of the things that's very dangerous is I see Christians, they show up in church, they keep their head down, they pray, worship, whatever, and then they're gone. They have no relationships here. You're not going to make it. I promise you. I can tell you from long experience, you will not make it if you don't have relationships in the church. This is how we survive. Ecclesiastes 4, verse 12.
Though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and threefold cord is not quickly broken.
But deeper than survival, relationships are actually part of the design of Christianity. 1 Peter 2, verse 5.
You also, as living stones, are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ.
Listen, in the church, our relationships are never marginal. They are an essential part of our walk with God, and they ought to be intentional. Relationships in the church are also part of the joy of serving God. Ecclesiastes 4, verse 11.
Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm, but how can one be warm alone?
He's talking about comfort and companionship. You know, the tragedy is how many people serve God alone. Listen, that doesn't make sense to me. Relationships and people are the real treasures of life. And it takes unfortunate circumstances sometimes for people to figure that out, but it's the truth. So 1 Peter is talking about testimony, and he's talking about some specific relationships for the believer. He talks about the brethren in 1 Peter 1, verse 22.
Since you have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit in sincere love of the brethren, love one another vehemently with a pure heart.
Okay, a large part of our testimony is going to be connected to our testimony with the people we serve God around. If I were to take anyone in this room and transport you to a place where no one had ever met you before, you could convince them of anything, couldn't you? Oh, I've been saved for 100 years. I read the Bible cover to cover every day, right? I've never sinned. I've never cussed. I've never smoked a joint. And they'd be like, wow, right? But see, if you say stuff like that around people that know you, well, it's a different story, isn't it? So, here is a crucial element of your testimony. It's your testimony among the brethren, right? Some people get up and testify, and there's people in the back going, right? I know better than that. And so, this is important. But then he talks about family relationships. It's fascinating. Peter gives the family relationships special treatment. In other words, Christian families ought to be different. 1 Peter 3, verses 1 and 2.
Wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they, without the word, may be warned by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear.
So he's talking about testimony in the marriage. How you conduct yourself in the marriage is one of your great tools of influence. 1 Peter 3, verse 7.
Husbands, likewise, dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered.
Okay, so here is, of course, I'm taking a big subject and I'm making it very small for the sake of time, but your testimony within the home is vital. This is how your family survives. If you get up on Sunday morning and you tell everyone, all right, get dressed, we're going to church, and your kids say, why? And you say, because church is important. We need to believe and obey what God says. But then your kids say, but Dad, you don't listen to anything God says on Friday and Saturday. Well, your testimony is shot in the home. And so listen, testimony in the home is vital to believers. And so what's interesting to me throughout this whole book is the constant emphasis of the Christian family. This is a major issue to God. God, when he went to visit Abraham, he says, I have known him, that he's ordered his house well. And so the point is, this is part of what it means to serve God, is that we are serving God in the context of human relationships. So let's talk then for a moment about the importance of relationships. The importance of relationships. There's three things, and of course there's probably many, but three that I will discuss this morning. Number one, relationships give personal strength. They give us strength. In our text, remember, the context of 1 Peter, these are people who are scattered. They used to meet as a church, but now because of political persecution, they have been literally scattered. They were meeting in little tiny groups all across the entire region. And so they did not have a large body of believers to relate to. And so there's these small groups of Christians. They're being persecuted, arrested. Some of them are even being killed for their beliefs. So when Peter is exhorting them about relationships, a large part of the reason for that was that they needed the strength that relationships would bring. Ecclesiastes 4, verses 9 through 12.
Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. If they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken.
So think about how relationships give strength in life to a Christian. They will give strength to your convictions. One of the things Christians need to do is you need to talk to your Christian friends about the things you believe in, because this is where strength comes from. If you make up your mind, I'm going to live in a certain way, you know what you should do is you should tell someone. You've probably noticed when we call the fast, I always ask people to raise their hand, right? I'm not taking pictures. I'm not writing down names furiously, all right? And then I'm going to check in and see, if you've got, knickknacks, crumbs on your chin. Oh, you lied. The point is that saying something, making a commitment actually gives strength to you. When you say, no, I'm going to do this. Tell your friend, we're going to fast together, right? Then when you are feeling weak and you start, straying towards the McDonald's line, he can say, hey, wait a minute. I thought you said we were fasting together. It gives strength. This is true in anything. Anything you make up your mind about in life, you should tell somebody, because it gives strength to that. It's very dangerous when all of your commitments to God are secret and private and hidden in your heart. because you can make them and break them and nobody ever knows. So this is just a very practical thing in life. You give strength to your convictions in relationships. Relationships give us strength when we are discouraged, when you are not feeling good, you're not feeling strong, or whatever the issue may be. Good relationships help you, right? I've got friends that I will challenge from time to time. Hey, what are you doing, man? I thought, you wanted to be a preacher. I thought this is what you wanted to do with your life. What's going on? I can challenge them. I can encourage them and lift them up. They are strength in tragedy. One of the poignant memories in my life was when my mother died that day. We were in Phoenix, and there was a lot of friends there at the hospital. I don't actually remember all the ones that were there, but I do remember Pastor Scott Lamb was there. He was my pastor at the time, and I remember how he reacted. I remember when we got home, at that time we only had one child. Paul, our oldest, was just a baby, and we had friends that were watching him. And when we got back to pick him up, he was a friend of mine. I remember the compassion he showed me. Listen, friends are vital. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you are going to experience tragedy in life. That is the inescapable reality of the human experience. You will experience broken relationships. You will experience the death of loved ones. You will experience things that are unspeakable. That is unfortunate, but that is real life. And that is why you need good friends, because you're not strong enough to handle all these things on your own. So friends give us strength in times of tragedy. They give us strength in temptation. Sometimes they give us a literal strength, right? Simply having people around, they can physically help you. There is this old guy in the Gallup church. He's since gone on to be with Jesus, but he was hilarious. One time he was going to move apartments, and he was an elderly. His name was Russ, right? I've told you about Russ before. He's the guy that couldn't get anyone's name right. He kept calling Pastor Bannet, Pastor Benet, Pastor Baguette. No, the other French bread, Russ. So he would just walk up one day and he says, all right, guys, I'm moving tomorrow at 8 a.m. I need you to be there. He didn't even ask. He just declared, you're going to come help me move. Hey, you know what? Sometimes friends are good for that, right? And here in Eldos, right? Sometimes you might need friends to literally have your back. So, especially if you're guarding the tent at night during conference. So, friends give us strength. Relationships also give reference points. Philippians 3, verse 17.
Brethren, join in following my example, and note those who so walk as you have as for a pattern.
He says, follow my example and pay attention to people that walk in the same way. We have a pattern. Your relationships provide reference points. When Rachel and I got married, we made a decision that we were going to intentionally reference certain people. The problem is a lot of people think we have to reference our family. You don't have to reference your family if they're bad reference points. We made up our mind. We saw good things in my parents, good things in her parents, but also bad things. We made up our minds. I'm not going to reference that. I am choosing to look at these families and these couples. They will be my reference points. Listen, this is the glory of serving God. You can choose reference points. Listen, if you're a young couple, you don't have kids yet, or maybe just a young single person, one day you're going to have kids. This is what you should do. Look around and find well-behaved children. Pay attention to their parents. Be parents like that, right? If you see children that they're literally levitating, okay, they're not usually literally levitating, but sometimes, they're similarly, right? These little demons, precious, precocious little child. You can choose your reference points. We did that. We saw families. We said, you know what? That's a good mom. We're gonna take something from, that's a good father. I'm going to reference something that he's doing. You can choose your reference points in the body of believers. See this in ministry. Rachel will often reference Lisa Mitchell and Gail Lamb. And these are two ladies that have helped her, not because they have literally done something. It's not like, some of you know Lisa Mitchell, or you've met her. She's not the type that shows up and says, all right, this is what you need to do. She doesn't. She just is just kind of there, right? If you ask her a question, she'd be like, I don't know. But Rachel has watched her and made her a reference point. Gail Lamb, very similarly, just being a reference point in life. So, relationships will help us by giving us reference points in life. And then, third, relationships amplify our ability. All the things that you and I are called to do, they are very difficult, and many times they are even impossible to do by ourselves. There's a lot of things in life you simply cannot do alone, whatever that may be, but relationships can help us do that. Ecclesiastes 4, verse 9.
Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor.
Two are better than one. We can become more effective in ministry, right? That's practical. We can partner together to evangelize. In our outreach yesterday, I think there was 4 separate groups of people outreaching because there were so many of us. We multiplied our effectiveness because there's more of us. We can partner together to enable a ministry, right? Think about any ministry. Think about the drama team, right? The drama team would be very weird if it was just one person, wouldn't it? Right? Now, I've met people, they could be a one-person drama team, right? They're schizophrenic, right? What did you say? I didn't say anything, It might be very entertaining, but you literally need help. In anything we do in life, we need help. They can make us more effectiveness, right? Think about the things that we do. Lloyd and Lisa, they're going to go pioneer a church in the next couple of weeks. We have the Lings going into Ethiopia, right? And we're doing that, but not because we can do it by ourselves, but partnership. We can partner together in our finances. And so relationships amplify our effectiveness because the kingdom of God is intentionally built on the framework of relationships. We are connected together. We are working together in order to amplify and increase our ability. There's no such thing as a one-man show in the kingdom of God. This is all a partnership. Okay, I want to stop there for a moment. Take some time and open up if there are questions or comments. I've talked about the context and the importance of relationships. If you've got a question or a comment, raise your hand so I can see it. Talking about relationships this morning. If you've got a question or a comment, raise your hand. Okay, spot.
Pastor, just want to ask, how can you broaden your relationships if you are, let's say, not struggling really, but if you want to be, more effective in relationships? How would you go about doing that, Pastor?
Well, every relationship, every good relationship must be intentional. The problem is when we are little, all of our relationships, they just kind of happen, right? These are the kids that you live by, and they're the ones you hang out with, right? But think about your best relationships in life, like your wife, right? That didn't just happen, did it? Right? It wasn't like also, oh, we're married. What? How did that happen? Right? You had to make a choice and you pursued her, right? I'm assuming, right? I'm guessing he didn't just grab you by the hair and drag you, right? Kidnap you. That's how all good relationships are. And so like I mentioned before, we have, over the years, we've made a point. I am choosing this family. We are going to build a relationship with them, right? I'm going to spend time with them, eat with them, talk to them, just begin literally showing interest, and so there must be some intentionality in it. So that's the problem is as adults, we lose a lot of that natural things. As kids are strange, right? Like Greg, we moved into a new house, and by the end of the week, every kid in the neighborhood. Yesterday, when we got home from outreach, we pull in, the kids are cheering. They're like, yeah, Greg's here. Now, that's cool, but I bet when he's 30, it's not going to be like that, right? Because that's how kids are. So as adults, we have to be aggressive. We have to pursue relationships. Does that help? Yeah, good question. Very good. What else? Yes, Dorothy. This way. Run.
Pastor, what I want to ask is this, how do you deal with if you had like relationships when you were married and it happens that you're no longer married and relationships just pull away? So how do you deal with it? Do you find single ladies to be your friends or guys or whatever? How do you deal with it?
Well, so in every life, in everyone's life, we're going to experience relationships that change and relationships that go away. And so some relationships change, we can be flexible with that. Some things just become different or awkward. You just got to learn to navigate that. Some relationships go away, but then, like I was telling Spa, we have to pursue new relationships. Now, I don't believe that simply if you are unmarried, you can only have relationships with unmarried women, right? There's a lot of good women that are married you can have a relationship with, right? So, but the key is choose well, choose good. You see people, this is someone who is doing well in Christianity. I'm going to choose to build a relationship with them. Does that help? Yeah, good question. Very good. What else? Other questions, comments this morning? Yes, he's way in the back.
Pastor, you said right now you have to be intentional to build relationships. But then how would you help someone who regards themselves as an introvert, and like, they tell you, no, I cannot build relationships with people. What advice would you give to such a person?
Well, let me tell you as an introvert, okay? So, I'll be totally honest with you. The fact that God called me to preach is just a sign of God's sense of humor. My favorite things in all of life are my family and being alone. And like number 3 on that list is so far down. It's like I thoroughly enjoy being alone. I could read for hours, play my guitar, study. But something I've discovered in life when I'm teaching this morning is that relationships are vital. So introversion is a very unhealthy malady. And so what it is essentially you're spending a lot of time alone with your own brain. And anyone who's past the age of about 25 or so, you realize that's a very dangerous person to be alone with. So your own brain is not healthy. Unfortunately, when you tell people that, they just say, you don't understand me, right? They need revelation. I got revelation. God help me. So, but the point is that introversion is not a personality type. That's incorrect. Introversion is, it's based on, I can tell you, listen, I'm not going to accuse people. I'll talk about me. Introversion in Jonathan Heimberg is based on pride. I'm better than everybody else. Why would I want to hang out with you, right? It's based on selfishness. Relationships take time and effort and they're messy. I would rather spend that time on me. And then it's based on just the simple joy of my own company. So those things are unhealthy. So unfortunately, it takes maturity sometimes to see that or some kind of revelation. For me, it was crisis in life. I went through some things where I realized I'm not going to survive if I stay alone. So there you go. I know I didn't give you any tips, but some info. Shannon.
Pastor?
Yes.
What advice do you have for someone that is completely on the opposite side of the spectrum? Like, do you have a criteria in the type of relationship you choose? Like, and what would they be like? Because obviously there's the element of you can't be friends with everyone.
Right. Well, you can be friendly to everyone. The key is, we call them the social butterfly. And so the key in that is that you have some meaningful relationships, right? I have very close friendships with a few people. There's maybe a handful of men that I have very close relationships with. And then there's a lot of people that I'm friendly with, I could share a meal with, and we could have a nice conversation, right? But I don't have deep relationships with them. But the key is you have to have some good relationships. You've got to have some. They can't all be on the surface, joking about the game, right? You have to have some meaningful relationships. So, because the problem is, if you have the gift of personality and of relationship, it's possible to be a mile wide and an inch deep, and you never have relationships that sustain you. Does that help? All right, let's move on before we run out of time. I want to talk about relationships and testimony, which is our focus this morning. Relationships and testimony. So, we see that all of our walk with God is played out in the context of relationships. There's, of course, the outward relationships, the world in general, unsaved family, our community that we live in. And our relationship with God is inevitably in that context. We live for God in the context of what they see, what they think, what our faith in our life means to them. And then, of course, there are the inward relationships. These are the brethren in the church, the people that we serve God with, maybe our own family in our home, the body of believers, who we are among those people. That is actually the evidence of our walk with God. Everyone who's ever witnessed has had this encounter. Someone says, yes, I'm a Christian, but everything that they are portraying shows that they are not. And so, listen, we are called to have evidence of our walk with God. A large part of our testimony is going to be derived from our relationships that we've been talking about. So, your testimony with God will depend on relationships. Genesis 18, verse 19.
For I have known him, in order that they may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him.
Okay, God says, I know what kind of man Abraham is. Why? Because of his family and his relationships. So think about this. Your relationship with God, your testimony with God, part of how God measures that is your relationships. You can say, oh, I pray, 3 hours a day. God says, yeah, but your wife can't stand you. Right? Your children think you're a hypocrite. Who cares how much you pray? Right? You act very spiritual, but your relationships say something different about you. Now, of course, this is encouraging because that means that we can gain favor with God by righteous relationship decisions. Now, of course, this doesn't mean you have to have a perfect family, because I've had people ask that question. Does that mean that if my kids are backslidden, that I don't have a relationship with God? Of course not, right? God did not say about Abraham because his children are perfect and they've never made a mistake. But what he said is, I'm commending Abraham because he commands his household to do right. In other words, Abraham didn't overlook sin. He didn't overlook what was going on in his home. He made righteous judgments, even if his kids made foolish decisions. Listen, you can be a totally saved husband and wife and have kids who are sinners. It's true. Trust me. I have some personal experience with that. Right? That's just how life is. So God isn't saying you have to have a perfect family, but that you do what is right and you have a righteous testimony. This is encouraging, of course, that we can obtain favor through righteous decisions, but this is also a warning. Matthew 5, verses 23 and 24.
Therefore, if you bring your gifts to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift.
Think about what God is saying. This is the altar, it's the sacrifice, this is your literal relationship with God. And what God says is, if you're coming to me and you're in conflict, you're going to have to fix that first. Now, we just did a whole series about conflict, right? For what, like 10 weeks or something. So I'm not going to rehash all that. But the point is that our relationships really matter to God. It is very, very difficult to be right with God and wrong with the brethren in the church. If you are always in conflict and in strife and there's always drama happening, it's going to be very difficult to be right with God. So, our ability to be right with God is going to depend, at least in some part, on our ability to be right and in right relationship testimony with people. So, that's your testimony with God, but then, of course, your testimony with people you know. 1 Peter 3, verse 1.
Wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they, without a word, may be won by the conduct of their wives.
Some Christians, unfortunately, now I'm not pointing this out because it's about wives, but it's about relationships. Some make the mistake of thinking that they can have a good ministry testimony without having a good home testimony. And that doesn't work. I've had to remove men from ministry because they covered up home problems. Right? Man, if you saw them perform, you give them a microphone and they're a 5-star Christian. Right? But when they're interacting with their family, it's hard to even tell that they are a Christian. Right? Everything's messed up. Right? But at church, they look so good. Listen, those are incompatible. It is not sufficient to be able to perform well as a Christian while having a bad testimony at home. Listen, your testimony in your home really matters. Your testimony in the church matters. How do people in the church know you? I had a conversation with a disciple one time. He was a young man, wanted to preach the gospel. He was headed that way, and he always caused problems. He was arrogant, he was disrespectful, he could do a good job, but he always was offending people. And so finally I said, listen, bro, you want me to send you out to preach, right? And he said, yes. I said, when you go out, who is going to pay for you going out? It's all the people in this church, right? Every single one of them you have irritated, you've ticked them off. So if I say, we're sending out Bob, right, let's raise an offering. Everyone's going to be like, oh, boy, I forgot my wallet. How's that going to work? You've got to have a testimony, right? I watch this, right? You've seen how we organize outreaches. We have different men organize all the different outreaches. And I've watched in every church I've pastored. There's some guys, they say, hey, listen, Bob's going to have an outreach, right? And 100 people show up on outreach. And then we make an announcement. Hey, Joe's going to have an outreach. Come support it. And his wife doesn't even show up. No one's there. And he's like, Pastor, no one will come to outreach. It's your testimony. Now, the problem is that when I interact with you, everything seems wonderful. Because, of course, you put on your best face for the pastor. Right? But your brothers, they know you better. And so that's your testimony in the church. 1 Peter 3, verses 8 to 10.
Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another. Love as brothers. Be tender-hearted, but be courteous, not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you were called to add this, that you may inherit a blessing. For he who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit.
So this is essentially what he's saying is, can we leave the scripture up there? It's all right. We can observe it for a few more minutes. So this is essentially what he's saying is that your testimony among the brethren is vital. And of course, we could go into great depth how this all plays out. But then, of course, there is the testimony or your testimony with those who are outside. This is a tragic thing a lot of Christians have experienced is you can witness to someone that you know, someone in need and their testimony gets in the way. I've had people come to me and say, Pastor, will you talk to my daughter? Why don't you talk to her? Well, she won't listen to me. You know why? Because of your testimony. Your testimony has gotten in the way of witnessing. Maybe it's someone on the job that's struggling, and out of compassion you think, man, I could help them. I'm going to tell them about Jesus. But see, they know you better. And your testimony gets in the way of your witness. That is tragic. I've even had the opposite, where I've witnessed to people and they're interested. What church are you from? And you tell them and say, hey, does so-and-so go to that church? Yeah, you know what? This guy, he always tells me about the church, but let me tell you who he really is. So someone else's testimony has counterfeit, or their counterfeit testimony has blown up effectiveness. I had a staff member years ago. This would have been, I don't know, 15 years ago, probably, in a church. This is a great man. He was about to get sent out. In fact, it was probably 3 months until conference. He was going to go out and pioneer. And then I discovered that for years, he hadn't been paying his taxes, right? And I don't know how it all works here, but in the U.S., if you don't pay your taxes, it's a federal crime. It's tax fraud. And so there's a very high likelihood you'll go to jail until you can pay it back. And I don't know if you know how it works in jail. You can't work a job, and so paying it back kind of doesn't work. So this man, everyone in the church loved him. I mean, he was like a great disciple. He could preach. He could lead an outreach. But he had another testimony, that he was dishonest with his money. He paid his tithe, wonderful, but he didn't pay his taxes. So he's a criminal. And so his entire destiny was shelved because of that. So the problem is that your testimony with people outside the church can affect you. But listen, the glory of testimony is if we maintain it. If you keep good testimony with people, you can make great impact in life. If you keep a good testimony, this is a great tool for gaining favor. All right, I want to stop there. We've got a few minutes for questions or comments. If you got a question or a comment, lift your hand. Okay, over here, Wendell.
What practical steps can one take going about restoring broken relationships, or your testimony?
Well, that's two questions. Restoring broken relationships or broken testimony, right? Since we're talking about testimony this morning, that's the one I'll answer. Testimony is something that we build over time, right? Unfortunately, we can lose it very quickly. The only way to rebuild it is again with time. So I believe that God is a miracle-working God. I've seen God help people rebuild testimony quicker than it seems should be possible. But the reality of it is it always is going to take time. Because your testimony literally is the statement of who you are, right? So you have to become that person. You have to be that person over time and restore that testimony. Hopefully that will then enable you to work on the relationship aspect of it. Yeah, very good. What else? Okay, Toomey.
Pastor, this is it's a subject that's very close to my heart, because sometimes I think depending on the relationships you have, it, like you said, if you don't have relationships in church, you're not going to make it, you know? During conference, you mentioned that redirection is not a failure. You know, we have like a weird way of processing redirection personally as couples, and how we think that people view us and how people treat us. And this kind of segues into what Dorothy was asking about. Okay, if I'm single, because people then start treating you differently, and I think we can all be better friends in church, because sometimes when people change their station in life or their position, or things change, they become either divorced or a widow, or they're no longer pastoring, we think, oh, then I can't relate to that person in the way that we used to relate before. And I think if we can just be better people and better friends as Christians, where you see someone's position in life change, and you still approach them like a normal, decent human being.
Right.
You are kind to them, like the scripture says. You are
Yeah.
courteous, or else people fall away because they feel like, oh, I am not this social butterfly anymore. Now I'm in this depressed state and nobody wants to deal with me, or they don't know how to deal with me.
Right.
Some of my very good friendships in this church have been from people who saw me at my lowest, and they approached me and they put their arm around me and they encouraged me and they loved me and they took me out to eat, even if it was just once. They were saying, just know we here, and it
Sure.
wasn't weird. So people, we just need to be better friends.
So that is true, but I will say, I'll offer a counterpoint. My experience, what I've seen over many years of experience in this is that when we struggle, we are really good at projecting. And so, because it's like this, I'm back for redirection, I bet no one wants to hang out with me, right? And we project that on people. Now, I know there are definitely in every church around the world, there are always some people that are weird like that, right? If you're divorced, they suddenly get weird, right? Or if you're redirected, they suddenly get weird. But I would say that's the exception. That is not the rule. What I see most often in my experience working with couples in all different kinds of circumstances, environments, is that people who are hurting, we project. If we think, like the loner, like Cizwe was asking, the loner type, we think people don't want to hang out with me. And so we get weird, and the people are like, why are you being weird, right? It's self-fulfilling. And so, but the reality is the church is full of a lot of really good people that really do love people and want to be with them. So, but that's true of all of us. We all naturally, I know when I'm not feeling very friendly, everyone else does not look very friendly to me, which is good because it gives me an excuse to go home and not fellowship. All right, very good. We're going to break there. Service begins in 5 minutes.